We are going to get things started. I hope everyone is transitioning well from their last meeting to this webinar, that your day is going smoothly wherever you may be dialing in from. Speaking of, if you could drop in where you're dialing in from into the chat, I know I and my fellow speaker here would love to know where you're dialing in from. I can speak for a sunny New Haven, Connecticut. We are experiencing a nice warm day, nice sunny day. It's great, a great change of pace. Thank you for dropping in your locations into the chat. Love seeing the diversity of the regions dialing in. And feel free to drop your messages to the entire group. You have the option to send messages to just hosts and panelists or to everyone. And I know everyone on the call would like to exchange thoughts, candor, and continue the chat and conversation we're going to have today in the chat window. Great. Continue dropping in those locations, and I'm going to kick things off. Welcome. My name is Kristen Sorek-West, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at the Yale School of Management. I am the Director of Marketing specifically for executive education. As I kick things off, a few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, and the recording will be distributed afterwards to all registrants. We are expecting this webinar to last about 60 minutes, and we encourage you to send us questions and comments using the chat and Q&A features. My executive education colleague, Joanne Legler, she's our Senior Director of Learning Partnerships, is on the call with us today. Give us a quick hi and hello, Joanne, if you can. Thank you. We are going to answer questions in the chat and in the Q&A along the way, but for more robust ones, we have time reserved at the end to answer those. Professor Putsis has a lot of material to cover today, and we want to make sure we get through it all. We are delighted to have you with us for what we expect to be a timely and thought-provoking conversation. The question of how to compete in an AI-driven world is one that every leader is grappling with right now. And today's session is designed to offer some clear and practical answers and insights. Our speaker needs little introduction. William Putsis is a lecturer in management at the Yale School of Management, and he brings a rare cross-industry perspective to the strategic questions that matter most. Today, he'll be exploring a deceptively simple but powerful idea that the real competitive breakthrough in an era defined by AI is not the technology itself, but the business models built around it. Professor Putsis teaches in our Leading Business Model Innovation program, a program for professionals exploring how they may reevaluate their business model for long-term competitive advantage. We're thrilled to have you join us. We love sharing academic insights and thought-provoking discussion, and we have questions about your interest in innovation and business model design, but more on that to come. For now, welcome, Professor Putsis. The floor is yours.
Kristen, thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to share some PowerPoints in a minute, but I just thought I'd say a couple words before we begin. This is an area that I've been working on for quite some time, particularly focusing on business models during periods of change, which, as you know now, as we're all living through a period of rapid change with the advent of AI and a lot of the other technologies we see in the world. So I'm incredibly excited. The good side of this, or the positive side, is that we have lots to cover. The downside is there's no way I'm going to cover it all in 45, 50 minutes. I'm going to try really hard to do this in about 45 or 50 minutes, so we have some time for some questions and discussions after. Normally, what's covered here, I'd cover in a day or two. So if we have more time, I'd go into everything in great detail. But I think my camera just for some reason went off, which we don't want. There it goes. All right, it's back. I have one of these AI-driven cameras that when I start using my hands, it listens to my hand gestures. So there are some downsides to AI-driven cameras. So let me share the screen and start in on what I want to spend most of our time on today. The area of business models has been shown repeatedly to contribute the most in terms of value to companies during periods of disruption. We saw this back 25, 30 years ago in the dot-com era. We've seen it through continual change with IoT and supply chain innovation, and we're seeing it in hyperscale today in what we what we see with respect to the advent of AI. What I often like to do when I talk to groups is suggest it's usually the focus is on the technology where the business opportunities lie behind that technology. So somewhere else in the value chain is usually the point of advantage we can take from a business model perspective. So as we work through today, what I want you to think about is how it applies to your industries, to your businesses. My trademark tie that I wear in these sessions, and the reason why it's loose is I wear a tie out of respect to you. You all are giving up an hour of your day in the middle of a crazy busy day, as it always is, to spend time with me. This is a sign of respect to you. I wear it as a loose tie because this is something that should be applicable. It should be a working session. You should be thinking about some of these things and how it applies to your business, not just in general or academic sense. So today we'll explore how AI is fundamentally reshaping business models across multiple industries. This isn't about incremental change. We are indeed witnessing a regime shift comparable to what we saw in each of the respective industrial revolutions, well beyond what we saw during the dot-com period. We'll examine which models are being disrupted, which will thrive, and most importantly, the strategic principles that separate winners from losers in this new area. I'll draw some historic parallels, but also think about a framework that you can apply to your business. You'll see some slides in here. You're welcome to have any of the slides. Everything I do is open source, but the slides in here will go through much more detail than we can cover in a short period of time. My hope is that as we work through this, what it'll do is give you a framework to think about your business, parallels to other industries that you can bring back to your own, and ultimately, hopefully a thought-provoking discussion that relates to what you have to do moving forward in your respective industries. So I want to think about a couple things. This is a slide that is all about different technologies, intelligent automation, autonomous systems, machine learning, NLP, and the like. This is about businesses that are being transformed. As you can tell in both of those slides by the bottom right, these are AI created slides. The rest of the presentation is not. I do this intentionally because I think about we want to start with some conclusions. And I think these are obvious, but hopefully important to note up front. I believe really strongly that fundamentals of business and consumer needs haven't changed. Good business models are based on delivering something that hits a deep-seated needs of your customers in a way that only you can do and in a way that you can protect something I call strategic control. Steve Jobs back in the day, and just recently Tim Cook reiterated this about how Apple's been successful, according to Tim Cook, in large part because of what they choose not to do rather than what they choose to do. Focus and a single-minded obsession with that focus, good organization always have. And I'm going to suggest to you in areas of AI today that focus is going to be that much more clear and that much more important. So the fundamentals of business and business models haven't changed. What has changed is that they've evolved in a way that the focus of what will be the winning part of your business model in the past no longer applies. Code in what you do to collect money on a software as a service business is being disrupted, as you can see by the share prices of many SaaS model businesses that that have dominated in the past. So what's going on today is those fundamental changes are happening so rapidly that you have to move quickly or you will be disrupted before you know it. That is moving in a way that is unprecedented. And that is a way overused word, but it is very true today. More than ever, your company business need to adapt and disrupt into the inevitability of change. But if you think about it, what's different about today? The last two slides were just AI generated. I could have had a junior associate do it, or I could have done it myself. That's not any different. Enter Tilly Norwood. Many of you have seen Tilly Norwood, the AI actress. I'm going to show you a couple quick, couple-minute videos that I think illustrate fundamentally what we need to think about. Listen to a little bit of what's said in the first part, and then I'll go to the second part.
They don't speak a human spoke. Tilly Norwood is back. I'm just a tool, but I've got life. And the AI actress is making waves with a new music video, Take the Lead, that takes tongue-in-cheek aim at AI backlash. Ironically, the all AI video starts out with a nod to the 18 humans involved in its creation. And then Tilly appears alongside a parade of flamingos. It may be AI, she sings, but her presence is very real. They say it's not real, but it's still humans make no mistake. Tilly Norwood was officially introduced in September 2025, created by Dutch actor and comedian Ellen van der Velde, and immediately ignited controversy among actors as real life talent agencies began showing interest. Emily Blunt calling it really, really scary in an interview with Variety. And more than 700 industry figures, including Scarlett Johansson, Kate Blanchett, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt backed a new anti-AI campaign. But in an interview on YouTube last November, creator Vandervelden had this to say.
Accept this new technology because otherwise it will be imposed by the tech industry and it's here to stay.
Norwood is not the only artificial creation to draw scrutiny in the media industry.
I'm mad at the world, just honest with pain.
With AI generated songs and artists on the music charts. I'm not real. And even a British TV host revealed to be AI in a stunt last year.
So think about it. 18 humans were used in that production. The focus of where the jobs will be very different in a post-AI driven world when we have things like, things like quantum computing, the speed increases and the capabilities increase. Where the focus of winning business models will be on where those 18 people are used and how they're used efficiently. Second part of it, there's going to be a short discussion here that let me play that will reveal even on the Today Show, the hosts are certainly bright enough, but they're not business people per se. The kids get it. Just listen to this conversation, very short one.
We had an expert on who was telling us how you can tell videos are real or fake. And one of the clues was the length of the video, 15 seconds or less, because AI generated videos are so expensive. Yeah. When you see a long form video like that, what does that tell us?
I couldn't tell the difference. There are a lot of people out there who could.
Well, that's also the thing. If this is where we are now, as the technology improves 5 years from now,
right. I'm sitting here thinking, is that really you, Craig?
This mediocrity, this is real. This is real.
But it's true. I mean, it's just a matter of time before it just continues to get better and better and better. It's already hard to tell.
That's right. We are going to have to figure out how to work with it as a society and how the economy is going to have to adapt.
Right, if kids love Tilly and they want to support her financially, now she's got to get an agent. Money is going to be flowing.
I don't know.
Good questions.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you.
And so the youth want to follow Tilly. Tilly has to get an agent where the business models change and evolve. They don't disappear. There's new talents, new abilities that will become relevant in the post-AI world that we haven't seen before. Some of them will remain. That agent representing a Tilly Norwood is fundamentally doing something no different than representing Scarlett Johansson as an example. So how does that evolve and what do we want to think about? And if I start to think about, I want to, starting with some numbers that may make some of you uncomfortable. Stripe is valued at 140 billion, 4 times its biggest rival, ADN, which processes similar volumes and is more profitable. Yet it's valued at $140 billion. Ramp is worth 6 times its revenue. 41% of US venture capital in 2025, you see it there, went to just 10 companies. And in early 2026, $2 trillion in software market cap evaporated, the recent changes in the market notwithstanding. This isn't irrational markets. It's a fundamental recognizing that rules had changed in ways that are fundamental to business models. Capital is now flowing to companies that own hard to replicate infrastructure, not to those selling subscription software. I'm going to say that again. Capital is flowing to companies that own hard to replicate infrastructure. Read what I call strategic control for those of you who know some of the work I've done in the past and what I'll talk about in a minute. Software subscriptions and just simply trying to protect code isn't going to be a competitive advantage when Claude can do it efficiently very quickly now, let alone in the future when things get that much better. Again, just throw out some of the numbers as we start to think about. So if I want to put it, capital is concentrated in companies that can own infrastructure and or control and have access to energy and data. Energy and data will be two themes that come up, and it's not just data. It's going to be data that's aggregated across multiple sources. More on that in a little while. By the way, I'm going through this really quickly. I get passionate about this, and I often tell audience when you're from New York and you get excited about something. I'm originally from New York, and you start talking really, really, really fast just because you're excited. This is something I'm excited about because there are opportunities more than there are threats if you understand the fundamentals of what's going to evolve over time. All right, try not to preach on this, by the way. Hopefully this is helpful and useful to you. All right, so now, by the way, as we work through this, I'm going to give two quick examples that are one very small, one very large, from startup to incumbent firm. The first I'm going to throw out there is this company and who is started by three 19-year-old now billionaires that they claim to be able to do a better job predicting consumer behavior than any focus group, any consumer research company out there. In the number of packaged goods companies that now have that they can register as or call clients is as large as most research companies these days. They're able to take what people do, behave, react, say online, and they claim, have not validated those claims, that they're able to do a better job than companies that exist. So will that industry that tries to use focus groups, that tries to use various methods statistically be disrupted really quickly? I'd argue it's probably somewhere in the middle. There are technologies that will survive, and those knowledge is important, others that won't. On the flip side of that, Tesla claims that it can predict. I was out in a facility out in Fairmont, California, a year or two ago. They claim that they can predict the impact of a crash test of an automobile to greater than 99% accuracy. So I can predict what's going to happen without actually crashing a car. I can just simulate it. So the ability to not have to physically do things in a way that I can use in Tesla's example changes the nature of the testing and certification industry. Similarly, can I use a digital twin in phase 1 trials for pharmaceutical companies? Where does that play in? What's already being done? What will be done as we move forward? Those are all the things I want to make sure we touch on in the next 30 minutes, and you can understand why there's a lot covered here and why I tend to talk pretty quickly. Okay, so build on this a little. So I'd argue that on the left-hand side is what I used to do in front of audiences in 2014. I had a book, my first book out, 2014, was called Compete Smarter, Not Harder. And I talked about all the things that were fundamentally different in the world back then. And I used speed as one of those examples. And I often cited BlackBerry as being disrupted so quickly in an industry. Fundamentally, what was going on then was no different than the Industrial Revolution that was replacing people who had skills, farmers, in an agrarian economy. Now they were moving to an industrial-based economy, and those skills were different. The different back then, back in the Industrial Revolution, is you sometimes had a decade or two to make those skill changes. In the dot-com area that I was talking about in 2014, if you will, a little bit later than dot-com, but back in the era 20, 25 years ago, the skills that needed to be developed could be developed in maybe 12, 24 months. Now we're talking 2 to 4 months and you can be disrupted. The hyper change, the hyper personalization at scale that we can achieve, matching the needs of the customer, is something that we have not seen before. Autonomous workflows, predictive analytics as per Tesla and the Aura, the company that can predict using consumer behavior online, are examples of the ability to do predictive analytics automatically, autonomously in the way we haven't seen before. And by the way, so far, I hope I haven't told you anything you don't know. That's part of the reason why I'm going through very quickly. We will, before we finish today, talk about specific questions you need to ask for your businesses and specific processes and tools you could apply to start to think about what you would do to predict what your business will need to do to change over time as we move forward in a world that's changing, not just with AI, but more generally. Okay, so I look at it, I want to preface what we're going to talk about here is I'll use the term AI. AI is not a monolith. It's not one thing. In some sense, I do get perturbed when I hear people talking about it in generic terms. It's machine learning, it's deep learning, it's computer vision, it's generative AI. You name it. It's robotics and autonomous systems building in to do that predictive NLP and natural language. It's a whole host of things. The old statistician in me, I always like it. I kind of think about it for those of you familiar with Bayesian updating. We have a prior, we get new information, we update it. It's just here we're able to take analytics skills that use computing power that we never had before and do it in a way that's really efficient across the broad array of possibilities that are out there. So I just want to be really clear. I'm going to use the term AI generically, but it is anything but generic or a monolith. Okay. So with that, start to think about AI-driven business models or AI-powered business models. A couple of things I think are going to be really important moving forward, and start to think about your business model. First, the data aggregation. The issue I think many companies have is they have proprietary information that's unique to them, but what they don't realize, they think that may be a strategic advantage, and it may be, but it's one that's easily changed or imitated and or disrupted if another company has data that's proprietary to them. It becomes an arms race to who has access to the best internal data based on their client and relationships. I believe really strongly winning models are those that are able to leverage aggregated data across multiple industries, multiple firms, so we can learn from what others do in other industries and bring that in and feed that in. So first thing I'll throw out, if you start to think about your company, your industries, what you do, to what extent are you able to access and leverage data from other industries as well to gain insights into your industries? I have a friend and colleague, Vivek Wadhwa, some of you may know Vivek out there. He's a technologist who's now trying to study how to cure various forms of cancer using data aggregated that we've never had the ability to do before. In healthcare related markets in the US, one of the obstacles to that is some of the privacy laws we have, data anonymization notwithstanding. He's now back in India where some of those barriers aren't as significant and making progress in that fight. Second is trust. I always hold up John Deere as an example of precision agriculture. Those that are familiar with John Deere's precision agriculture, and they made the decision when they launched that many years ago to ensure that the customers own their data. Again, the customers own their own data, but what they envisioned is a world where, because of that trust and the ability to do a better job predicting what the farmers need in the way of hydration, water, chemicals, nutrients, and the like, if they could do a better job with that, the farmers would voluntarily trust the data coming off the John Deere internet-enabled equipment and voluntarily give it to John Deere because their performance on the farm is significantly better as a result. The end result of that is a high majority of John Deere equipment owners voluntarily give their data to John Deere inside of the precision agriculture system, but also a high majority of non-John Deere equipment give their data to John Deere as a result of John Deere's ability to do such a great job with precision agriculture. The result now is John Deere has insights from everyone's equipment, not just their own. How do you make that happen? And then how do you do it in a world that's going to be increasingly governed by data ship ownership rights and restrictions, as it probably should? You think about GDPR in Europe, you think about some of the restrictions California, and others have placed on ownership rights in the US. How much can you develop that as what I call a strategic control point? Companies that control their own destiny by aggregating proprietary signals have an advantage in an AI world, because if you don't have the right data, there's no insights to be gained. Okay. So moving on from that, I'm going to argue there are a few companies that disrupt in different ways. If we had a day, I'd go through each of these in detail, and we can do cases on John Deere and Abercrombie and Fitch, on Nokia, on IBM, and others. But I'm going to give one at a time quickly to start to think about some of what the firms have done in various ways, and then start to see if we can draw some conclusions from there. So I look at Abercrombie and Fitch, for example. They went from exclusivity to radically inclusive. It's a mindset disruption. For decades, A&F's entire business model was built on manufactured exclusivity. Mindset was to sell a hyper-specific, inaccessible, and often exclusionary cool kid aesthetic. Between 21 and 23, the leadership completely inverted this mindset. They stopped dictating trends to teenagers and instead started listening to the data. Think about Aura, the teenager, $3 billionaire teenagers I mentioned earlier, started listening to data, shifting the focus to belonging and targeting the former teenage customers who are now young professionals. The result is they moved, oops, excuse me. The result was they executed one of the most miraculous retail turnarounds in modern history by introducing a diverse set of tailored denim, abandoning heavy cologne and dark stores. They became a TikTok approved staple for young adults. It's a mindset change. John Deere did that with data, as I mentioned before. Nokia is currently in the middle of it right now. We'll see if it's successful. IBM with Red Hat open sourcing. And again, we can spend tons of time on each of these. So I'll go through. Some companies needed to reinvent the skills that their people were able to access and target through. The classic example that I will give here is BYD. Most of you know is a Chinese EV manufacturer, and they didn't just build EVs and batteries. They quietly built their own global logistics company. They saw a future, a bottleneck, what I'll call a strategic control point in global auto transport. So they commissioned their own fleet of specialized Ro-Ro, often called roll-on, roll-off, adapted from the military, something often done in air support for a former client of mine, Boeing, for example, on cargo ships. Starting around 2022, they heavily invested in lithium mining and battery cell production long before EV supply chains faced global crunch. Strategic control of the logistics and supply chain, and the strategic control of what are the rare earth minerals they invested ahead of the curve. As a result, in between 23 and 26, global demand for affordable global demand, that is not US necessarily, for EV surge. We'll probably see more as a result of what's going on with respect to oil prices currently. So they were able to be successful concurrent with that growth in demand, and the brand has grown tremendously. If you're in particular Mexico, as an example, you'll see the brand all over, much less so in the US. Just one of many examples. We could look at Netflix and what they've done over the years. I just saw an article today about how Netflix will not be affected other than being more productive and profitable in an area of AI. Okay, I'm going through these really quickly just to give you a sense of we need to change our mindset, we need to change our skill set, and we need to start to think about brands and how we change ultimately what we do with our brands. And so an example of that, if we want to start to think about some of those, would be Stanley. They've had a couple issues and backlash more recently, but they were a utilitarian brand focused on rugged outdoorsmen and trade workers. They changed that significantly, focusing on a network of female bloggers, particularly the Buy Guide. They overhauled the brand engine. They shifted marketing color palettes, focused on millennial and Gen Z, in particular female demographic, adopting what I might refer to as a sneaker style drop. And then they ultimately did it for water bottles. So if you think about how brand now changes in an area of AI in what I call a TikTok world, where things need to be communicated in different channels, and in particular in a different style, which much shorter vignettes, they mastered it over the last few years. And then the final, I would say we need to think about portfolios, the companies that were able to transform themselves is, think about as one of these examples from many. I always think about Apple as being fantastic. Consumer hardware, they now have a presence in banking. I just got my notice literally popped up as we were talking that my Apple card, they're going to send a new one and it's expiring, Goldman and all that notwithstanding. But think about what we do with Apple Pay and the revenue streams through the channel. We can go through NVIDIA as another classic example of what they've done over the years. So we need to change. If we think carefully about what we do, we need to disrupt the market. We need to disrupt the mindset. We need to disrupt the skill, brands, and portfolio across the board. All right, so let's take that. So what does the new landscape look like? A couple things. Software companies, this is a quote, not mine, but there's a point here. Software companies are inherently vulnerable. If I think about industries that have changed over time, the old model, you write code, you sell seats forever. Over the last 20 years, I'd argue software has had a free pass. You write the code once, put it in the cloud, sell monthly subscriptions, 80% gross margins. In 2026, AI can describe what an application to do and build it in seconds. The code itself is no longer what I call a strategic control point. And I'll mention what that is in a minute. You start to think about that barrier to entry, it's collapsed entirely. The value has shifted at companies that own something fundamentally scarce, something you can't just generate with a prompt. Gartner, for example, estimates that 35% of point solution software as a service, SaaS tools, will be replaced by AI agents within 4 years. But the other 65% will survive. The ones with deep strategic control, network effects, and regulatory compliance protection. With that, I want to talk a little bit about the following notion of what industries are at the crosshair. If you start to think about the landscape, software as a service, point solutions face the highest disruption. Per seat pricing is dying as AI agents automate entire workflows. Business consulting is another one is being reshaped. McKinsey, BCG, Accenture, EY are all racing to integrate AI and hybrid teams to deliver projects 35% faster. Junior associates at consulting firms are being disrupted and outsourced in many ways to what is being increasingly AI. I always think about the paradox in firms, legal firms, consulting firms that have the paradigm over the years that they hire really good junior people, they train them, they get better, they weed them out. Those that succeed eventually become the senior partners. But what do you do when you have very few junior people who become the senior people of the future? The deep-seated subject matter expert is what will be valued, not the ability to do specifics to research, coding, and the like. Salesforce is pivoting to Agentforce. OpenAI's partnerships with the big consulting firms threatens its stack. Software development itself is being commoditized. AI writes code, as you know. Financial services, so I'm going through here, I should go through software development. Financial services are regulatory strategic control points that protect incumbents. It's called the FDIC. It's called insurance. It's called the deep data that they have on every single thing we do financially. All right, started to build up. Legal healthcare is one that is very slow to disrupt for a whole bunch of reasons that we could spend an entire day or two on. And so if you're in the healthcare industry and you start to think about that vertical, you better think about how you protect those strategic control points now. You think about how that disruption can lead to the next opportunity and how you leverage margins now for future opportunities. All right, start to think about what is a strategic control point, which most of you, at least a number of you that know me, know what that is. I'll talk a little bit about it quickly, and then let's get to some suggestions as to how you can take what I'm talking about here in general terms and apply to your businesses. So you have to identify what the constraint is. You could break it, ultimately have to own it, integrate what you're doing in terms of getting that value capture. So I think about strategic control points, and I'll let you look at the graphics there. The classic example that I know some of you listening have heard me talk about this before. I can do it really quickly. It's an older one, but the example is soft soap. Many years ago, a company called Minnetonka was the first to introduce liquid soap in the market. It was the 1970s. We were going back 50-something years. The problem they faced as a small little company up in Minnesota is that they introduced it nationally. Since they're the Unilever, Colgate, Palmolive, Johnson & Johnson's the world, they would just imitate, the big players would imitate what Minnetonka would do with this hopefully successful introduction. They'd swamp the advertising, they'd buy brand shelf space, and ultimately soft soap would only have been introduced to enable others to seize the opportunity as they get squeezed out of the market. So how do you, as a small player in this industry, now trying to create a whole category, how do you get advantage of the larger players in the market? They estimated at the time, if they could keep the big players out, the Johnson & Johnson and Unilevers of the world for at least 12 to 14 months, they can build up enough shelf space and brand presence that even if the big players come in later, they can still maintain at least a third of the market. So what they did, short version of a long story, is they bought up the world's supply of pumps. They went to every available supplier of pumps in the world, and they bought up a year's supply. So for a big player to come in, they would have had to build their own factory, reverse engineer, get it onto the market, and they indeed did. They indeed did do that, but took about 14 to 16 months before they were able to introduce the competitive products. Colgate Palmolive ended up selling out the market with a 35% market share a year later at a tune that was rumored to be $1.7 billion. That's how you become a billionaire. Note what's important about the story, which is the connection to AI. That is that Saw Soap wasn't in the pump business. They were in the soap business. But the pump was that scarce thing in that value chain that if they can control that, at least in the short run, they could keep the big players out. The key with AI is what is going to be that key point in that value chain, that scarce resource that you can own, that can forestall competitive advantage in the market enough to get your footing and disrupt the market with a new approach, a new business model. And that will vary widely by industry. What won't vary by industry is it's not going to be code. It's almost exclusively going to be capital, investment, infrastructure, data, or regulatory control. In many industries, it's the latter. So think about what I just said and how it applies to your industry. So if I start to build on this, I'll give a couple quick examples and build a framework because, as I said, I'm going through this really quickly. We could spend a week on this, and I get excited by all of it because it is opportunity now. And I know I keep saying that. I'm going to give a couple. SpaceX, Stripe, Ramp, Base, and Tesla are all classic examples. One would think, as if I think about SpaceX, for example, most people think it's a rocket company. But it's integrated, it's an integrated machine, just like Standard Oil was back in the day. The control point for space used to be cost of orbit. Reusable rockets broke that constraint. The ability to stop a rocket and land it back on the space pod that it launched from is a significant significant new constraint in the market. They then identified the next constraint, data transmission capacity, and launched Starlink, which generates recurring cash flow to fund Starship. It's this revolving process. Ramp and Stripe see clearly directly in the physical flow of money, but transaction data is the scarcest asset. Base Power didn't just sell grid software to utilities. They became a utility company. It owns the physical batteries, the customer relationship, and the virtual power plant, just like Rockefeller did in the Standard Oil days. By the way, if anyone wants to watch the Men Who Built America, it's a 10-part history channel documentary on the Industrial Revolution, you really should, because what happened during the Industrial Revolution with Standard Oil and Carnegie and others, Carnegie and railroads, is happening today. The trial that you just saw, the verdict yesterday with Meta and YouTube, is an example of how the regulatory environment and the legal environment is playing out just as it did back then. Think about Tesla, for example. Most people focus on the auto side of Tesla, but I recently read a quote that got it spot on, and I wrote a blog on this, an article in CEO World a while back, but Tesla isn't Ford. The analogy to Tesla isn't Ford. The analogy to Tesla is Con Ed to Duke Power. The ability to Powerwall, the ability to think about what the revenue they get from now an opened EV charging network when they're by far the largest network in the US, that dwarfs what they were able to do with the automobiles. Part of the reason why the S and X lines are being dropped. Again, only part of the reason. Okay, so let's build on this a little bit. Energy is a big control point. I put this AI-generated, big in your face, bold graphic in here because John Iwata, a colleague at Yale, a few years back, went to most major companies and was able to interview CEOs of companies, of large companies throughout the world. And one of the questions he asked, what keeps you up at night? What are the things you worry about most? And John, who ran brand for IBM for, I think, 26 years, said the number one thing that came across all of them, by far and away, the thing that kept them up at night is energy. Throw in data centers, throw in quantum, and all of a sudden we got a scarce data resource to the extent that you can have access to data. I'm part of an organization that's looking for business opportunities, keep it at that. And the business opportunities, the first question we ask often is, where are the data and is that investment accessible to energy in that local area? So big shout out for control points with respect to access to energy. And that's something that isn't talked about nearly enough, in my view, anyway. Okay, winners and losers. I'm going to go through this quickly to make sure we get to the portion that speaks to what are the diagnostics, what are the tools. Think of disruption as a spectrum. It's not binary. On the left, most disrupted, you have per seat SaaS tools, as we talked about. Next, hourly rate consulting. AI compresses 100 hours analysis to 10, if that. Revenue per project drops dramatically. How do you change that? On the far right, by contrast, vertical AI companies that own the full stack. The technology, the physical infrastructure, and the customer relationship. These are the new standard oils from back in the Industrial Revolution. I'll give this through quickly, only because I want to get to, in the interest of time, the tools that we might use to come back. So you start to think about how you might use it with AI agents replacing junior development tools. The litmus test from a podcast, by the way, we'll send you a link for anyone who wants. We created a podcast based on some articles that mirror much of what I'm talking about here. And if you listen to the 29, almost 30-minute podcast, you would never in a million years know there weren't, at least I wouldn't know, there are not two humans debating the issues we're talking about here. It's an interesting read because it will mirror this, and we'll make sure you have access to that along with the slides as well. But if we use sort of the podcast, if your product disappeared tomorrow, would your industry's core constraint actually come back? If yes, you're on the high ground, you're standard oil. If the answer is things would mostly limp along, you're just a feature. Are you a nice to have, or are you a must have? In the AI era, nice to have gets commoditized. Think about that again. Are you nice to have? You're just a feature. Are you a must have? It's the nice to haves that are in particular going to get disrupted. Business models that win. 4 models emerge as structurally advantaged. First, vertical AI integration. It's the new advantage that, if you think about antitrust policy, is going to be a decade behind. Think about companies like Flexport that just didn't just sell software to freight brokers, but built the actual logistic network. I think a company I worked with a number of years ago, Lincoln Industries, they didn't just sell fabricating to Harley Davidson, they integrated into their supply chain. Don't just sell the shovel, be the miner. We often talk about Sam Brannan, the one person who consistently made money in the gold rush of the 1840s. What did he do? He sold, many of you know the story, but he sold the shovels, pickaxes, and overpriced supplies to the people who ultimately didn't find gold, to everyone else. Be the shovel, right? Actually, don't sell the shovel. So think about what you want to make the advantage. You want to sell the shovel. Don't just sell the shovel, to say it correctly. You also want to be in the mines. You want to own it all. Transaction infrastructure, right? Stripe, Ramp, Visa. They sit in the physical flow of every dollar. Platform plus strategic control points. Salesforce's pivot to Agentforce. Bloomberg Terminal. The proprietary data and network effects are unreplicable. What is it in your industries that you can do to make it non-replicable? So in 5 to 7 minutes, let me go through a framework, and again, you'll have it on yourself. Here's what I call a practical decision tree. First, does your business own a strategic control point? You have to go through the value chain, the entire industry. What are those portions of the value chain that are in short supply that can be protected? Do you own that, or is it someone else? Something scarce, hard to replicate, central to the value chain. Do you own it? Does someone else? If the answer is yes, use AI to enhance and extend that strategic control point. Integrate vertically so that capital is required in addition to the deep subject matter expertise. So build data advantages around that asset. See if you can leverage data from other parts of the value chain and other customers to make that sustainable over time. If the answer is no, you don't own a strategic control point, the critical question is whether you can acquire or build one. If you can, invest heavily. Start to think about how you become both the factory and the data. You become both the miner and those that are selling the shovel. You can't just sell the shovel. Easy for me to say, right? You can't just sell the shovel. You have to be both today. If the answer is no, there's no ability to protect anything along that value chain. You have to ask and ask the question and answer honestly. Maybe you should just harvest cash and pivot to something else. If you're in your career right now and you think about industries that are going to be disrupted, are you in one that's being disrupted, or are you in one that you can disrupt? I often ask people in sessions that I'll do, if you were to come back 10 years from now and look back at this conversation we're having today and you didn't do X, someone would have said, what the heck are you thinking? Why didn't you? What's your X? Think about that in your career as well. I want to invest my time, effort, money, and career in things that won't change, as evidenced by this webinar and the thing I do in sessions that we do at Yale. At the end of the day, this question of what business model will win in AI is going to be a decade-long process. Bill Gates once said famously, we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in 2 years. We tend to underestimate its impact in 10. What we're talking about right here is going to be a maybe 2 to 7 year process. Many of you out there, given at least what I know, people who typically attend this, that's a sweet spot of your careers. How are you going to take advantage of it? So if we do it, 5 questions every leader should ask. 1, what's the fundamental constraint in the industry? What is that strategic control point? Can AI help us break it, or can we use it as a solution for us to be able to get an advantage? By the way, if AI can break it, it's not a strategic control point and you will be disrupted. The one thing you own in an industry, think code for software as a service companies as an example. If that's what you own, it's not a strategic control point because it's easily disrupted by Claude's ability to code and replace it pretty quickly, as one example. Do we own the high ground, the scarce asset, physical asset, in addition to the intellectual property and perhaps the software and other things that may go with that? What would happen to our industry if our company disappeared tomorrow? Would it just limp along, or would it not be able to survive? And do we own that portion of it? And are we building a feature of factory? What are we doing? Is a factory sustainable? And by the way, these are analogies. These are not literal factories. Are we building a feature or something that can be owned and protected? Questions for you and your industries. So I created kind of a 2x2 matrix, captures the strategic landscape. X-axis is how easily AI can replicate your core offering. Y-axis is whether you own that scarce asset, physical infrastructure, regulatory positions, perhaps unique data that's leveraged across multiple data sources that aggregates data from those multiple sources. Top left is vulnerable. High AI replicability, no scarce assets. That's your point. Software as a service tools, content farms, commodity consulting. In that case, your strategy has to be a pivot or exit. And by the way, as I'm talking through this, think in your mind, where are you and your company in this simple 2x2? All right, so the bottom left is transitional. AI can replicate the software later, but you own some assets. That's, say, traditional CRM and ERP platforms. And think of what Salesforce is doing as a way of pivoting through Agentforce and others. So you think about what the strategy should be. You pivot fast to data strategic control points and AI agents, as in Salesforce. Top right is fortified. Low replicability due to regulatory compliance or trust barriers, healthcare, legal, portions of the legal industry, but only portions. Defense industry is a classic example. Strategy should be use AI to augment humans. Don't try to replace them. You may need fewer humans, and the result is a higher degree of profitability. Bottom right is dominant, where we want to be. Low replicability and scarcity assets. The ones I said before: SpaceX, Stripe, vertical AI plays. Strategy, you want to integrate and dominate. That's where you want to be. But note that what you want to do in there is you want to take those margins you get, because you're able to protect what you do at high margins and pivot to the next opportunity. Kind of what Tesla has done in automobiles. They pivoted to the next opportunity, that is in energy in particular, both EV charging, home, and industrial. So could go through this. I'm going to put these up really quickly for you to look at and read. If we had more time, and we'd actually do a live case study on Salesforce as an example, because it's still an open question where they'll do, how well they will succeed in each of these. So I'll leave you with that and maybe tease you a little bit for potential opportunities. Think about what the strategic control point strength may be here. What's the threat? Think about OpenAI's Frontier Alliance with McKinsey and BCG. Think about alternative AI platforms directly integrated into the C-suite. Transitional. Agentforce is pivotal to their future success. And like I said, we have lots of time. We'd go through this in detail. But as I told you at the outset, I'm going through this quickly because we got 2 days worth of material, and hopefully to whet your appetite a little bit in this 1 hour, and hopefully also give you some tools to walk away with. So if I go 2026, repricing wave on software as a service, consolidation through 27. We're going to see a lot of physical integration, vertical integration. I worry a little bit for smaller companies, or the tech giants were able to do it, see that, and get the opportunities before, given they have the wherewithal in terms of cash flow to do that. And then ultimately, we'll see a new industrial area probably within the next 3, 4, 5 years, where, as the Gartner estimates, 35% or more of products that are software as a service type companies replaced. Takeaways: code, no longer strategic control point. AI has collapsed the barrier to entry for software. Strategic control is going to determine the winners. A lot of that is going to have to be the analogy of a factory rather than the software code. You need to own a physical asset of some sort. You need to own that strategic control point, and it's not going to be simple code as it was in the past. And so the transition to being able to get a full stack vertical is one of the things that's going to win as a business model moving forward. As you mentioned, as it mentions there in the third one, the result is that vertical integration is back, and it has to be. Again, for smaller companies, I worry a little bit about the ability of larger companies to spend in ways that smaller companies can't. Priority is focus. You see the quote from Tim Cook that I mentioned before. 100% true. And number 5 really is the most important one. Repricing wave is happening as we see it now. You got to act now. You got to think about the business models. And as I often say in the sessions we do live, and it provides some evidence of this, that the single most contributed to business value during disruptive areas without question by far is business model disruption. We're seeing it happen as we go. As you start to think about where you are as your company, the 2x2, how do you move to the bottom right? How do you gain the strategic control? What do you do to get vertically integrated in a way that you can protect it? And then ultimately, how do you use data, energy, and other advantages? And if you can't do any of that, think back to that decision tree, maybe you should think about doing something else for a living. And I say that a little bit facetiously, but also in seriousness, as you start to think about, well, should we be divesting? And I'll hold up Nokia as a classic example. They're divesting some businesses to invest in what they see as the future. The future will tell whether or not they're going to succeed, but I think they're doing exactly the right thing as a classic example. Okay, so with that, I'm going to leave you with this story and open it up for at least some questions. I can stay later. Apologies for those that wanted to ask some questions, and you will run out of time. I can stay afternoon. I spent the last week with my son. He's living in London. 28, just graduated from London School of Economics, and is he's looking for jobs, and he took some time off, and he and I went to St. Ives, Cornwall. So the picture right there is from the Harbor Hotel in St. Ives in Cornwall. Now, what the heck am I talking about? And ending a talk on some hotel in Cornwall on the western side of the British Isles of UK. I'm cautious because people from Cornwall don't say they're British, they're from Cornwall. So I want to be respectful of that. But you see the water there looking out of St. Ives. This, I think, is the one concept that won't change. So if you look at this, that's what we agreed. My son and I came in, we had the suite. He had his own room. I had my room. In the main living room, they greeted us with a gin. I don't know how they knew we both like gin and tonics. We came in a gin, Fever Tree tonic, which is what I like, a bucket of ice, and a nice note. Welcome to relax, enjoy the view before you head out to dinner. That constant, a personal touch, caring, thoughtfulness, and human to human will never change. I believe that really strongly. The problem is you got to get entree to get to the point. Ironically, it was Claude that laid out the itinerary for this trip that we did, 5-day trip to Cornwall, to London and back. I got back last night to the States. It was Claude that laid it out. So Claude didn't mention the Harbor Hotel as the place to stay in St. Ives. We never would have stayed there. Given entree and access, you need the personal touch to solidify it. Now I'm telling all of you, go here. It's a great hotel. That personal touch is the one constant that won't change. What has changed is how you get access to the individual that will be there for a long time to come. I hope what we've talked about here at least has given you some thought for what we do in here. We also have this is not going to be a sell job here. I promise not to. but we have a longer program that's all about leveraging and thinking about how we develop leading business models in an area, not just of AI, more general. It's about taking what we do and the principles I apply here, going into much more detailed case analyses, and have you then take your businesses live and have us talk through where you are and what you need to do to change your business model. And you'll see, I'm not going to read those slides, but that's the program. We're going to send you a survey, or you'll have a link to a survey in a minute, to see if there's any of that we might alter that would suit your needs. But this is where it gets into the fun part, because we take those principles and we get into depth, both in terms of other industry case analyses and yours. Okay, I promise that's all I'll say. But I teach on it, my colleagues saying, and others teach on the program, and invite you to contact Kristen if you would like to know more. And I'm going to stop there. But I'm going to put up one more slide and open it up for anyone who wants to stay for questions. And it's going to give time, but I'm right at 58 minutes. There's a survey, if you want to link on it, Qualtrics survey, 15 minutes. We put an April Fool's deadline on it just because I like the thought of April Fool's Day, 5 p.m. Please do fill it out. We'd love your thoughts on this. If you get value in what we're doing here, what you're looking for in various programs. I'm going to open it up if anyone wants to stay for questions. My apologies for not giving more time for questions. Like I said, I've been studying this for a really long time and very heavy into what's going on right now with AI in particular along that value chain, and where winning business models will play out and what you need to do for those winning business models. So I get a little bit evangelical because I get excited about all of this. With that, Kristen, we have questions, Joanne?
We sure do. We sure do have questions, and we are at 2 minutes. And so I see some people are saying farewell. So I'm going to say thank you so much for attending. I completely understand if you have to run to your next meeting. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And we will be sending you this recording and some additional information, including the resources Bill mentioned and the survey link and a follow-up email. For those who can stay on, I will ask some of the questions that were asked in the chat. So to kick things off, we did get a couple questions about in certain industries, and one that Weigel, a past participant who's on the call with us today, asked, have you asked AI to identify strategic control points by industry and identify winners and losers, and how to adapt?
Great question. Yeah, it's funny. My good friend Claude, as many of us refer, I have, and it's interesting because what I've done, hopefully I'll keep this reasonably short, but what I've done my whole career is I work with companies using things like game theory models, and particularly look at value chains and what I call competitive and capabilities map to assess where you are in those strategic control points. Sometimes look at growth share matrices and portfolios to look at the balanced portfolio. Recently working with a company, and I had AI do all of that, and it did a flawless job. And I look at the ability for, say, a Claude or Gemini or whatever it is you typically will use for yours, the ability for that right now to identify both industries that have strategic control and control points within a customer's value chain. And by the way, when we talk about strategic control, it typically would, for most companies that's selling B2B, it would be what is in your customer's value chain. For those B2C, it would be in an industry value chain typically. As I did ask the question about what industries are most vulnerable, many of the things you saw here came up really quickly. Software and code came up as one of them. Hardware, physical assets came as relatively low in strategic control. And it's a great point. All of you should do it. Take your industry, take your firm based on public information. Claude in particular, Cowork will do a great job walking through what it is you think about vulnerable in terms of strategic control and where AI threats are coming from. So great question.
So have you seen any industries not being disrupted by AI?
Healthcare. Well, no, I shouldn't say, I gotta be careful. I immediately said healthcare. I don't think any industry there are no industries, I would argue, that are not being disrupted by AI, but it's a matter of degree. So I mentioned healthcare first, in part because there are so many regulatory constraints. We're not going to replace, someone may email me later and say, I disagree, which please do, but I'd argue phase 3 clinical trials are not going to be replaced anytime soon by AI. Earlier in the process with digital twins, and work that you do in clinical trials before you get to phase 3 may very well and is in process now. How you onboard in a health delivery organization inside of the current maze of compensation and payment schemes inside anything from government to Medicare to private health is such a maze that until that's disrupted, probably not. I always hold up a company called The Works in Latham, New York, that have an agreement with Walmart as a result of a legal decision based on the regulatory requirements across all 50 states in the U.S. Compliance issues is one that will be more immune to disruption as long as you meet those compliance goals. But I will say, and I'll leave this another good question. I'll leave the answer to this. I always think about as a former CEO of UL, super great CEO over the years and a good friend over the years, Keith Williams. What he used to say is he used an example of how the companies back in the day, in the last wave of disrupted, they often got over regulatory requirements. So he argues, and I think he's right, is that Uber and Lyft are allowed to exist because they overcame the legal requirements. They had to own a medallion because they don't own the vehicles, at least the way that the business structure has been set up. Airbnb has overcome the need to have a physical license to operate a hotel, etc. So even where I say about regulatory requirements, you got to be careful and take that even with a grain of salt, because you run into the issue is what happens if someone is able to overcome that with a creative solution that no one else has thought about.
Speaking of regulations, do you see AI used in the legal system, like with judges and advising?
Oh yeah, and absolutely, and it most certainly is. A former colleague and a friend who runs a company out of Denver that Ramon, and he runs a company that analyzes contracts for potential points of vulnerability. And they do a really good work on trying to replace, essentially, he's a lawyer by training, but they replace the need to work through all of that. Think about what happens at closings and mortgage insurance and all the legal work that goes into that. The legal profession, as some of you probably lawyers out there know, it's being disrupted really quickly. It's interesting though, Kristen, that it's my son who eventually wants to go back to law school, but he's trying to gain business experience now, using him as an example, because he believes, and he's 100% correct, that he needs the business experience and a law degree to be really effective ultimately in what we do in business. The number one, as a study recently, Fortune 500 firms, the number one background for Fortune 500 CEOs is a law degree. That's not being disrupted. How I write a contract, how I evaluate, and I would be shocked if judges, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'd be shocked if a judge doesn't use some sort of internal LLM or sort of public available. You got to be careful with privacy, the available information that can be let out through public sources. But it is one of the quickest. Certain portions of the law are some of the quickest areas to be disrupted today.
I noticed on your 2 by that the education industry was not listed. And I am not asking this question selfishly. We did have a guest on the call ask, how is AI going to change the education industry within the next couple of years? And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, you got an hour? The education industry is amazing. It is the most antiquated. I think there are, and I am not just shouting out Yale and executive education for being in the forefront of that change, but I am, because you think about what's going on with blended, you think about what's going on with online prepping for what you do live, using those very expensive, both in terms of dollar cost and opportunity cost of time live, using it most efficiently is part of what's evolving. Education in general, from post K through 12, is the most antiquated. You get in the classroom, you go on with a PowerPoint or chalk. It is the most inefficient industry, just dying for disruption, but they own strategic control. They own the branding. They own the certification. They own the physical assets. And they are the slowest to change. And if you've ever been in an academic institution, it's like watching paint dry if you want to get something done and change. I have a friend of mine who went, two friends, actually, two good friends, both of whom went from Boeing in industry positions to in academic positions. One at Purdue, one at University of Seattle, Washington, both great institutions, but they're incredibly frustrated by the pace of change. So education should be on there in a way that when it gets disrupted, and AI is disrupting. I'm amazed, by the way, that I've seen some institutions that say they don't want AI integrated into what the students do. In all my classes I teach, I'm saying if you don't use AI, you don't use AI to answer what questions I'm giving you, you're at a huge disadvantage. The real test is how you use what you get out of the prompt that you give into a ChatGPT, a Claude, or Gemini, or whomever. And so, a long-winded way of saying I could go on for a long time on education. It is not only ripe for disruption, it's slowly happening.
We may have found our next webinar topic, Bill. I'm going to ask you another question because you over the course of this webinar, you've named a lot of big brands. And so a question came up for smaller organizations. So how can companies, especially small ones, gain a line of sight into scarce resources so they can plan ahead for disruptions?
So I'm going to quote, so great, another really good question. I'm going to quote a friend of mine who, when I gave him a pre-copy of my second book, Carrot and the Stick, his response, I said, is Rob Pollock, former head of branding and commercial at Boeing. And Rob's response to me, and Rob, if you're listening, you'll appreciate this. But he said, Bill, your book is disturbing. And not what you want to hear once you give someone an advanced copy of your book. You want to hear great, brilliant, all those other things. And no, it's disturbing. I said, Rob, what do you mean? He said, it reads like a recipe to monopolize. And my response to him is, Rob, it is. It's the recipe that Google, Alphabet, Apple, Amazon, and others have used to dominate industries. If you're ever going to fight back as a small player, you need to understand that playbook. You understand those strategic control points. I would argue to a small player, most small players don't have access into those unique strategic control points, those scarce resources. Usually they require that much more scale. So it's really tough for you to have access. And that's one of the biggest things as a small player. One of the things I often look for when I evaluate startup opportunities or startup firms and what their opportunities look like. What I would argue, however, if you don't have a vision of what you want the strategic control point to be down the road, you're in trouble. I need to know what I need to build that I'm going to protect down the road for better margin, better growth, and probably even more than that. I need to know how I take that and parlay the margins in one strategic control point into the next. I mean, think of what Apple did over the years building this entire industry. Much of it was fortuitous, but much of it was also with foresight. Think about what the iTunes platform, how many of you currently inside the Apple ecosystem will switch to an Android operating system tomorrow, even if it were better, because you'd have to drop all the platforms and interchangeability and the ability to use your iPad seamlessly with your Mac and the Apple TV and everything else. It's just too much work. And so the ability to do that, how are you going to build that as a small company? How are you going to build it as a startup? And I'd argue if you don't have that vision, I'm concerned.
On that, you named scarce resources earlier, capital, investment, infrastructure. Could something more intangible be another, like trust?
It can be. Um, so I'm pausing only because people often think of brand as a potential strategic control point. In some cases, it can be. You have to be real careful, though. So I'll use brand and then come back to trust. But if you're spending to build a brand, someone else can spend to build a brand. So it becomes an arms race. Rita McGrath has a good book, came out at the same time as my other one, and she says the name of the book is The End of Competitive Advantage. And she claims this competitive advantage is no longer relevant because things happen so quickly. Competitive advantage is transient. I argue that her premise is right, her conclusion is not right, in that if you're able to get a strategic control point that you can own, it becomes all the more important because it is protectable. Same thing with trust. Trust can help you lose the business. It is not always a way to win the business. You need to give something besides trust. I often hold up in sessions the difference between what I call salient differentiators and must-haves. Safety in airlines is a must-have. I need to trust that I'm going to be safe. TSA lines are going on right now, notwithstanding, but I'm not going to win the business by saying I'm safer than someone else. You can trust me more, but I can lose it if I don't. Trust, I'd argue, in many cases is necessary. Sometimes it's enough to be that point of differentiation that can be sustainable, but it's so much more difficult. John Deere did it through ultimately trust gave them the ability to obtain what was the strategic control point, and that's access to the data in John Deere and non-John Deere equipment. So the question I'd ask as a follow-up to the trust question is, can you take trust and parlay that into something that would be protectable? If you can do that, then the answer is yes. The answer is you can't. Trust inherently is someone else can build if they spend enough time, money, and resources to try and make it work.
I'm so glad that you actually talked about proprietary data, because a question came in earlier about, and we are approaching a quarter past the hour, so I'll make this the last question so we can wrap things up tidily. There was a question that came in about proprietary data being the next gold. How do you, if there's, the topic was customer privacy policy protection, what about business data privacy protection? How do
Yeah,
you begin to process that proprietary data in a way that still makes it proprietary?
great question. So in some industries, the insight isn't in the specific data cell records. The insight isn't with the individuals. And so many industries anonymizing the data with an arm's length third party is something that can still provide the insights without getting to issues in data protection. And by the way, I want to distinguish data ownership from data protection because they're very different concepts. Ownership rights are being set up, GDPR as an example, in Europe. But the idea to be able to use those insights without owning the data becomes difficult. If you have access to the data, anonymizing in some industries are feasible. In healthcare, it's much more difficult to do it in a way that gets over appropriately the controls that are in place for healthcare privacy. So I would argue that, and by the way, we're talking about AI right now, and my Amazon is going off because apparently there's someone at the house with so hopefully you all can't hear that in the backdrop. So long story short, I would argue that there are certain industries that can use aggregation and not anonymized. Others cannot. The question is, can you set up a third-party firm that can do that at arm's length? Again, in some industries it's yes, others are no. The example I'll hold up really quickly is we launched a business number of years ago that was trying to help small businesses. And I would argue the one advantage we had in doing that was if you are a baker in Chicago, I may talk to all my businesses around me and I get information about all the businesses in, say, Lincoln Park area, Chicago, that's helpful to me as a business. But I also need insight what's working for a baker in San Diego or in New York or in Topeka. It's the ability to get that insight that makes ultimately the structural difference that will give you the advantage that others, in terms of insight, that others may not have.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Putsis. Thank you for giving us so many insights, so much of your research and your time, and for spending extra time with us to answer these questions. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone on the call. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. And for those who stayed on longer to listen, I appreciate it. We really loved your questions and we loved having this rich discussion with you. I'm going to wrap things up. We've had a wonderful, can you believe it, 75 minutes together. It flew by. And I will be sending everyone a follow-up email after this webinar ends with the webinar recording, along with many of the resources that Bill mentioned throughout the call. Please let us know if you have any questions. We're happy to help. We're happy to talk with you further. We hope you enjoyed your time with us today. Thank you,
Thanks,
Bill.
Kristen, for the opportunity, and everyone, thank you for the opportunity of your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.